Today, watch where the money goes, especially at election time. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Well, before the federal election, the heads of the Commonwealth Departments of Treasury and Finance release a report on the state of the government's budget, together with updated economic forecasts. It's known as the Pre-Election Fiscal and Economic Update, or PEFO. And the 2022 PEFO came out yesterday. Now, Stephen Bartos from the University of Canberra wrote this up in the conversation. I want to take you through some of what he said. The Charter of Budget Honesty Act of 1998 requires the publication of a PEFO within 10 days of the issue of the writ for a general election. This year's was easy for the Treasury and Finance Department to compile. PEFO came a bare 3 weeks after the budget on March the 29th, and not a lot had changed. The economic forecasts are identical. Wall-to-wall deficits, and growing deficits actually. Treasury would have heaved a large sigh of relief last week when unemployment numbers came out unchanged at about 4%. If they'd come out significantly lower, Treasury would have had to have updated not only the economic forecast, but also revenue and spending forward estimates. The unemployment rate affects both income tax and welfare spending, and in the PEFO, the forecast is the same as at budget time, so no recalculations are required. Unemployment drops and then goes a little higher later. Yes, the economic outlook is volatile, but it is the same volatility as at budget time. It does not provide a reason for changing the forecasts. Now, there are, though, a few small adjustments to spending. They net out at almost nothing. The estimated deficit in 22-23 is $77.9 billion. That's close to the budget's $78 billion. New spending since the budget includes some infrastructure projects and community development grants, unsurprisingly prior to an election, but no significant new programs. A mystery in this PEFO is the removal of provisions for some secret decisions taken but not yet announced. Reversing those decisions amounts to a saving, which has been used to offset some new spending. Decisions taken but not yet announced have become so common that this year PEFO refers to them by their own unlovely acronym, the DTBNYAs. Don't know how you pronounce that. They are recorded in Appendix B as across portfolio, various agencies, reversal of measures reported as a decision taken but not yet announced in prior rounds. They amount to $50.6 million in 22-23, climbing to $110.2 million in 2025-26. Now, what were those decisions? We don't know. They weren't announced. We do know the government has had second thoughts and reversed them. It might have been because the needs the measures were designed to meet have changed, which would be a sensible and rational decision for the reversal. Or it might be because they were foolish and misguided decisions, meaning someone put a pencil through them to save the government embarrassment. We can't tell. Either way, it is not a great look for budget transparency. And this is not the same as the separate provision in the contingency reserve for items that cannot be disclosed for commercial or national security reasons. Often, these relate to procurement negotiations still underway, including, as noted in PEFO, the Australian Electoral Commission's Information Technology Modernisation Programme. There's a good argument that the amount of money the government is willing to pay to a private provider should not become public until negotiations are over. That's normal, and the 2022 PEFO continues the practice. Now, there's one interesting fiscal risk which relates to the foreign affairs and trade portfolio that's been updated since the 2022-23 budget, and it relates to Export Finance Australia, the national interest account. There are 4 financing facilities under the NIA, and since the 2022-23 budget, there have been changes to one of the financing facilities. The Critical Minerals Facility was established on the 28th of September 2021 to provide finance to critical minerals projects in Australia, where private sector finance is unavailable or insufficient. The facility has a maximum aggregate exposure of $2 billion. On the 2nd of February 2022, the Australian government announced 2 loans under the facility with a total maximum value of around $239 million. In the 2022-23 budget measure Critical Minerals Facility projects, the government announced that it was in negotiations for an additional loan. And on the 4th of April 2022, the government announced this additional loan of $1.25 billion to Iluka Resources to support the establishment of Australia's first integrated rare earths refinery in Western Australia. The financial implications of these loans are not for publication, and the fiscal impacts of the loan to Iluka is not reflected in the budget estimates to protect commercial sensitivities. These impacts will be reflected in future economic updates. As at the 11th of April 2022, no funds had been drawn down from the facility as yet. And then there's something called unlegislated measures. And they say, in line with normal practice, and as was the case in the 2022-23 budget, the forward estimates in the PEFO reflect the impact of all policy decisions, including those that remain unlegislated. The estimated net impact of all unlegislated policy decisions over the 4 years, 2025-26, announced prior to the PEFO, and after taking account of parameter changes since the original announcement, is a negative $54.3 billion in underlying cash terms. And that comprises policy decisions made prior to the 2022-2023 budget that require legislation to be implemented, which will have a net negative impact on the underlying cash balances of around $19.7 billion over the 4 years to 2025-26. And new policy decisions announced in the 2022-23 budget that will require legislation to be implemented, which have a net negative impact on the underlying cash balance of around $34.6 billion over the 4 years to 25-26. This includes policy decisions with an estimated net negative impact of $19 billion that require annual appropriation bills but do not require any other enabling legislation to be implemented. Consistent with normal practice, the estimates in the PEFO assume that unlegislated policy decisions will be legislated and will take effect from the next possible commencement date. Where legislation is not passed by the scheduled commencement date, it's passed with amendments to the original decision or is rejected, there is a risk of a variation to the fiscal position outlined in the PEFO. And there are a number of tax measures included in the 2022-23 budget that take effect on or before 1 July 2022. Many of those measures can be legislated at a later time within 2022-23 without materially affecting estimates. Now, it's important to understand that PEFO is written by the secretaries of the Department of Finance and Treasury rather than their political masters, meaning they are about the only time the secretaries can speak freely. Sometimes the small details they include give an insight into what they're thinking. In 2016, for example, the media identified an inclination on the part of the departmental heads to push harder than the government in cutting spending. It is a concern that seems quaint now. A return to surplus is a distant prospect at best. So if PEFO is essentially the same as the budget, I suppose the question you've got to ask is, do we need it? And actually the answer is yes. It makes budgets and elections more honest. For a start, it makes the budget or budget update that precedes it more honest. If ministers know that the top budgetary officials will soon release an independent report, they will be less inclined to interfere with budget forecasts or to invent over-optimistic numbers, knowing that they will be found out in PEFO. And even more important, it means election promises are more likely to be kept. Before PEFO was introduced in 1998, when a government changed hands, it was routine for the newly elected government to renege on its promises by saying something along the lines of, well, we're shocked, just shocked. We had no idea how bad the country's finances were. PEFO has done away with that excuse forever. It means both sides of politics know the state of the books going into the election. Parties' promises are made with that full knowledge. Incoming governments no longer have a budgetary policy excuse for dropping their promises. And for that reason alone, PEFO is worth keeping. Now, if you're buying your home in Sydney's contentious market, you don't need to stand alone. This is the time you need to have Edwin Almeida from Ribbon Property Consultants standing alongside you. Buying a property is both challenging and adversarial. The vendor has a professional on their side. Emotions run high, price discovery and price transparency are hard to find, and then there's the wasted time and financial investments that you make. Edwin understands your needs, so why not engage a licensed professional to stand alongside you? With RPC, you know you have experience, knowledge, and master negotiators looking after your best interests. So shoot Ribbon an email at info@ribbonproperty.com.au, and if you use the promo code DFAWTW/Martin, you can get a 10% discount offer. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.